Good morning, everyone. We're starting in time, and that's the best way to start, I think. I think if we can all just sit down comfortably. Just a small exercise. Close your eyes. Can we stop distributing the form for just about 30 seconds? Just 30 seconds. All of us close our eyes. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. And as Dr. Srinivasan said yesterday, complete your sentence in your mind as I am. I'm powerful. I'm present. I'm gifting myself next 1 hour to learn and make impact in the lives of hundreds and thousands of children who are looking up to us for guidance and counseling. I am the change maker. Thank you. You can open your eyes. Thank you. I think energy is entirely shifted. We're all settled. You see, I've not even changed clothes, so you can imagine that. What has it been for me to prepare this session? The pocket square is not visible. It is visible now. I'm Sameer Arora, and most of you know me as counselor, and I like to be remembered as counselor, though I do support a function of running a school with my leader, Monica Sagar, at Shivnada School, Gurgaon. My friend, Bhakti, who's a higher ed professional, and everybody knows her. I think post yesterday's plenary session, I think all of us know who Bhakti is, and she's been a very inspiring individual. If any of you have not been able to get in touch with her, know about her journey, know what she's been doing all these years, and how she's passionate about making an impact. Thank you, Bhakti. And my friend Amrita Gulati, she's transitioned from being a student to being a teacher, to being a counselor, to being head of counselor in a very premium school of the country, and then becoming director of IC3 Institute. These are also my sounding bags, you know. So whenever we have troubles, questions, dilemmas, we just call up each other. And that's what I think what IC3 has been able to do, build a community. And the session is very, very interesting because we recently presented in another conference, Bhakti presented in another conference, and we raised a lot of controversy. So we want to make a disclaimer. We're not experts, we are learners. We will learn from these groups. We're not here to tell you what you need to do. We're here to discuss and brainstorm what we can do and why it is important to measure and nurture the function of counseling in school. How many of us are heads of schools here? If you can raise the hand, just to, okay. And the decision makers. How many of you are deputy heads or vice principals or head of high school? Excellent. And how many of us are counselors? Excellent. And any other role, university representatives? Okay. Okay, there's one. Excellent. So, you know, I was reading up a report. There's an interesting report by OECD, I think European Training Foundation, and European Commission and UNESCO, which talked about that 30% in kids in the world only know about 10 professions, 30% of the kids in the world. It also talked about that the counseling function has positive impact on the educational, social, psychological, and economic outcomes in a child's life. It also talks about that career counseling function, counseling as a department, career counseling department, builds positive attitudes towards the school for the students and the parent community. And that's how the Alumni Connect work. So I think considering that premise for the head of schools to understand and remember that this guidance counseling function, which we've been advocating with Ganesh as I think the big noise maker around why it is important. If we're creating a department, what is important also is to standardize benchmark what you measure and what kind of nurturing it is required. Next. So we're going to talk about nurturing and we're going to talk about measurement. Before that, let's just look at what does nurturing mean and what does measurement mean. Can we just try to minimize the photograph there? So I think one thing we've all been talking about lifelong learning. How many of you use this word at least once a day? Lifelong learning. Okay, most of us use it at least once a day. So if the lifelong learning is the function, and what we teach in school, what we're talking as counselors to our children in school is going to be redundant from 3 to 5 years, what is the function of counseling department? That means the counselor have to continue to stay connected with the industry, with the higher education, so that they can bring back their learning and have this continued and sustained dialogue with the children, that what they learn is only going to survive, help them survive for the next 3 to 5 years. What they need to do and learn and develop as a skill is lifelong learning. The second is, how many of us believe that our career counseling departments are focused mainly on educational choices? Educational choices post secondary school. That means grade 12 के बाद क्या करना है आपको? आपको engineering करना है, आपको science करना है, आपको science नहीं करना. Isn't our most of conversations around that, right? Is it appropriate? We don't know, the careers of future don't even exist. There is a very interesting report, please note it down, maybe I can share it with all of you later. It's called Future of Jobs 2018 by World Economic Forum. Almost 70% of the jobs today will be lost and automated. So what are we telling our children about? Subsumed under personal counseling. Amrita said this is her favorite statement. And I think one cannot take away one from the other. Amrita is herself a qualified behavioral counselor. She's done psychology herself as master's level. Can we take away the personal counseling aspect from career counseling? Or can we also build up the career counseling aspect in a personal counseling? Are they interrelated? Is a question we need to go and ask as head of schools. Am I asking my personal counselor, behavior counselor, social and emotional well-being counselor to become career counselor? Is there a philosophy behind that? Is there a logic behind that? Or is it just that I'm sort of standardizing my workload analysis in the school? That, okay, you do this, you just have 5 periods, there are not enough problems, so why don't you do counseling also? So these are the questions we have to ask ourselves. Yes.
Because we just did the student quest survey. Yes. And from that, where the personal counseling aspect comes in, and it says that majority of the students, there are only 2 emotions that they feel when they're, the top 2 emotions were anxiety, and excitement. And we do know that both being high can impact decision making, sometimes in a good way, sometimes not in a good way. And I think as counselors, we need to ask, are we addressing emotions? Are we saying and to what level? And to what level do we feel it's important, and do we feel we are equipped to respond to that? And also in the survey report, it talks about how having a counselor makes them more aware of the less anxious. They reported feeling more motivated, less anxious when we compared schools that had counselors versus that did not have counselors. And here the scope was career counselors. So, and how ready they felt to make the transition, to know that what it takes to transition to university. So I think that sort of underscores what you've just spoken about.
Thank you. Can we go back to the slides? Whose interest do we serve? School, students, or both? That's another question we have to ask ourselves as school leaders. Aren't we serving our interest when we talk about the Ivy Leagues in the top colleges, and we shut down our doors to the best fit colleges, which may not be as probably popular? Are we giving enough space and weightage on our social media and other platforms? We'll talk about it when we publish our career counseling reports. So whose interest are we serving? Are we serving children's interest, or are we serving our interest, or are we serving institutional interest? And I think theory versus practice, and of course you will say कि समीर बातें तो बहुत अच्छी लगती हैं, सारी काउंसलिंग में आके बातें करते हैं, जब आपको 200-250 बच्चों से मिलना पड़ता है ना, तब पता चलता है. And I've done that all. We've all gone through that journey, right? But I think nobody said when you chose to become a counselor it's going to be easy, right? I think we all get personally invested in each child's life, their successes, their failures, the stories become our stories. And hence we pass on them from generation to generation as experiences. So I think there is a theory of career counseling, but there is also a practice of career counseling. Is there a gap? Are we nurturing a capability of our counselors, our school leadership to identify that deviation and address that deviation? That's another question. So why should we measure? We have children for 14, 15 years under our care. More on average, if we look at the demographic mobility, most of us will have at least 60 to 70% population stay with us. That's been my experience. And when the children leave, without any direction, what kind of experience are we leaving the parent with? They've been with the part of a community for 14, 15 years. Implication on school resources and management. And of course, there's school resources and management. How many of you said you are school leaders? Raise your hands. Sorry, typical teacher I am. Okay, how many of you think you have an annual budget on your slide? Just think, don't raise hand up and down. How many of you have a slide of budget of career counseling in your annual presentation to your board? So there is a direct implication on the resources, human and financial, both. And that is why measurement is important, because it also sets up an accountability. Because, for everybody else, there is a lesson plan, there is a measurement matrix. When the results come out, we print up a slide, we do the graph, we do see, okay, this is the skill deficit in maths and this is the skill deficit in science. We do benchmarking tests, right? SET and ACER IBT, and of course, Cambridge schools do checkpoints. But with counseling, what is the accountability of a counselor and the department for that matter? So I'm also holding it on myself accountable to that. It is important to do as head of schools. It also builds school story. It talks about, when you look at the vision statement, how many of you have read your vision statement last? When was the last time you read your? If you've raised your vision statement of school in less than 24 hours, raise your hands. If you've read it in last 1 week, raise your hands. I don't need to say more, right? So where is the school story? When we talk about making an impact, is making an impact reach somebody in the top university in the world, in the top college in the world? What kind of impact are we talking about? What about bottom 20%? What is the middle 10% doing? So I think that sort of measurement gives you matrices which talks about the school story, which is not focused on the top anywhere. Also, the process, we're talking about how many of you think the education has changed post-pandemic? Let's see. Or it hasn't changed at all. How many of you think it hasn't changed at all? It's just the same. Trust me, it's just the same. We've just changed the mediums. So if the world we are living in, VUCA world we continue to talk about, the systems are changing, the world is changing, the labor market is changing, the higher education requirements are changing, then the processes you set in stone 10 years back, 5 years back, do you want to review them? So also measurement tells you what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, what are the processes and resources you need to bring back in or change and alter based on the next needs. And I think different stakeholders we're going to talk about today, and of course the most important stakeholder is a student here. Student in question who's under the counseling. We also talk about the parents and extended family. Parents is the next best stakeholder we've talked about, and of course the economic relationship we have with parents. They are our clients and we are serving them. So parent is an important stakeholder. Faculty and staff. How many of you think, just think, don't raise hand. How many of you think your faculty and staff is invested in the career counseling process? Think about it. No answers. Just think about it. When was the last time you saw your counselor sitting in the staff room and not in her office, in a closed door, saying, I'm the counselor, it's not my job. I'm the counselor, I don't want to do substitutions. I'm the counselor, why should I go to the PT field? I'm the counselor, why should I be in the annual achievement award ceremony? So ask these questions. The next important stakeholder is, of course, universities who are taking your students in, so building this relationship. Potential students, don't we all publish results? Don't we all publish placements? But by view of doing that, we're also inviting the external stakeholders to get invested in our school and invite more talent into our school. And who has that? What direct bearing does a potential student have on the school? Right? The right talent we talk about. There are a lot of international schools, if you Google, they do almost 6 kinds of scholarships. Academic is just one scholarship. There's sports scholarship. They're talking about performing and creative arts scholarship. They're talking about community service scholarships. So there are so many scholarships. So how do you invite them into to become a part of the community? And finally, media and investors. We understand today that education is not what it used to be in terms of structures which 20, 30 years back. There are different organizations which have come to India, are investing in schools big time, right? They're either buying over schools or they're giving them funding. There is, of course, venture capital, whole lobbying, which is lobbying in investing in schools, buying, taking over schools. So they are also stakeholders, because if you do well, if the media publishes your report at the right forums, they're the ones who get interested, and probably that will bring you from one small school probably in a big town, or a big school in a small town, to an international community. So I think from here, we've also did a survey. So thank you so much for those of you who've attempted our survey. And Amrita will take you through insights from our survey.
Okay, I think Sameer has set the context, and this is going to help me build further on that. Sameer, if I could have the clicker. So we actually thought that we'll, ask school leaders some questions and just get to know how many schools have counseling, what is it, what's happening, what's the current scenario like. So it says 82.6% of the schools have a dedicated career and college counselor. This is through our personal WhatsApp, network group. So this is obviously not representative of the actual scenario. 73% of the counselors are formally trained in the field, which is very encouraging to see. And then you have 65.2% of the counselors share additional responsibilities. Of course, we didn't know what is the length or breadth of those additional responsibilities, but the fact that they're involved in multiple roles is not surprising, but we'll see how it impacts counseling, right? What was really interesting was that even though so many schools have counselors, almost 61% of the schools don't have a separate or allocated budget for counseling departments. So this is kind of alarming, considering that we all have budgets for training of teachers, where is the budget for counseling going? Why is it being not thought of? And also you need an office, you need space, you need internet connection, you need so much. So where is the, funding or thinking about the funds for the department coming? And then also 52.2% of the schools do not review the performance of the department on an annual basis. Okay, now this is a question that maybe it's not done for teaching as well. Yeah, but maybe you don't need to do it for teaching simply because you can see last year's average for English was 82, this year it's 84, so we are on the right track, right? Or the number of students who are taking a particular subject is increasing, decreasing, that is an indication, right? Maybe you could also see that the number of students who are in the plus 90% are increasing, or the fact that you don't have failures in the subject any longer. You have those ways, you don't need to sort of go down, drill further down into that at a very, at a very cursory level. However, I mean, this also goes to show that it's not only exclusive to the counseling department, it may also be that we are not doing an annual review of other functions of the school as well. Yeah, but because the focus here is of counseling only, and if there are people who are training, if counselors are coming up in schools, I think this is something, sort of a loop that needs to be closed to see what is the impact and are we really providing what needs to be provided for. 56.5% of the school leaders do not feel equipped to set the goals, targets, and outcomes of the counseling function. Yeah, and I think that's the reason we tried to put our heads together to bring this and say that, and of course it's a conversation and we need to see, it also needs to be contextualized to your school. And we'll talk about some of the broad, matrices that we could put in place and then seek some responses from you, on that. And also there was 91.3% of the school leaders who said they'd like guidance on how they can set processes, how they can set some parameters in place to assess the impact of counseling or the value of counseling in their schools. So we asked, what are some of the, if you were to do this, what could be some of your sort of focus areas in the outcomes that you'd look at? So two things came up. One was outcome-oriented standards that school leaders wanted to focus on. So top university placements came up. Financial aid secured for that year for the cohort came up. Yield, which is application to acceptances ratio. How many applications are students making and how many acceptances are they getting?
And there are schools who restrict that to increase the yield.
Yeah.
It's like colleges do that to reduce the yield. So it's just a very interesting scenario.
Then you have informed subject choices. So, that's another benchmark for the grade 10, 9 and 10, whereas maybe the university placement could be an 11 and 12. So are you seeing that students are now making more informed subject choices? That came up as an outcome that they'd like to measure. An increase in the network of universities that the school is exposed to also came up as a measure of success. At a process level, so those are really outcome-based. It's not hard to sort of capture those or measure those. Then these are some of the process-oriented, parameters that school wanted to focus or school leaders wanted to focus on, which is curriculum alignment to specific cohorts. So are the counseling departments really realigning their curriculum, what they're offering to their students as per the need of that year, of that cohort, So you may have one cohort which has, just to make it simple, a cohort that has 80% students in sciences, whereas the next year you have students where they're 50% of the class is in science. So the need of the cohort then changes. So are counselors being able to adapt to that in what they're offering? Then timely submissions of applications by students and others. And I think the others is also important, because what is your process for letter of recommendations, et cetera, and the timelines for those at a process level, which makes it easier for both the counselor and the students. The key challenges in the measurements that were reported was, we've never thought of our.
Make me curious. What is the perception amongst school counselors of a top university? Is it as what Mr. Arora earlier said? Is it just the rankings and where?
That is, yeah. For the sake of this survey, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, this is for recording, Bhakti, not for you.
All right, so I think it's rankings for sure, but it's also brand perception. I know a lot of universities that are not highly ranked, and these are primarily international universities, but they're extremely sought after by Indian students and families because they've invested for decades in marketing in India, and more power to them. So I think it's both. It's not just rankings.
There's one more question.
It's not a question but a comment. Are you not then perpetuating as counselors the whole concept of ranking? Something that we keep talking about, busting the myth of ranking. When you say top universities, what is the criteria of it being top?
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment on that. We all have a lot to say on that, actually. You're right, absolutely, Anjali. But that's also the reality. And I think that's a separate session. It deserves a separate conversation where and there are a lot of such conversations happening on questioning what you deem to be prestigious or good for your student. Is it best fit versus ranking? And that conversation has been happening for a long time. And it needs to be perpetuated more. But I do think that there is much scope to improve there from a counseling perspective.
Okay, this is just what was reported. So this is not, so we are presenting the findings to you, and of course you'll see how the shift happens when we are talking about suggestions for, the matrix.
When you are talking about the universities and ranking, I think it's important to keep in mind the subject. For example, Georgia Tech could be considered as top-ranked university for aerospace engineering, but may not be top-ranked for economics, just for an example. So it's very important which subject linked to which university. Thank you.
Can we move forward, and then in the end we leave it for?
So the challenges are actually, that school leaders or counselors have not had the time to think about or never been able to think about a format, unclear of what parameters to include, the administrative support that may be required to put the report together. So of course it's going to be collating data from other, not only from your office, but maybe also from an academic coordinator's office, also from, let's say, the parent, putting a parent survey together, etc. So the administrative support that you'll get in running a survey and collating the information. Then also the big question on timing, when should we do it? Should we do it in every grade? Should we do it as an exit interview formality or grade, when should we do this? And how, when to assess and capture the data. So and what points do you need to capture the data as well? The frequency, how often do you need to do it? And the element of subjectivity in this. And I think the last point, which probably is not on the slide, but because it didn't come in the survey, but I know it's come up in conversations with a lot of counselors that have had experience of 5 years plus, is to say that it is a lot more additional work. I already have so many students to look at. Now, if I have to sit and put reports together, that's like added work. So these were some of the challenges, and this sort of helps us to get deeper into our context, which Sameer started off with, and I'm going to pass it on to Bhakti to talk about a proposed framework, and we'll go deeper into that.
Thanks, Amrita. Did someone want to say something? Oh, okay, all right. Oh,
Question from the virtual audience. Yes, Sarah, if you'll have to unmute her.
Hi everybody. I wasn't sure if you were able to see us actually, so I was partially curious. But the other thing was, Amrita, the survey, is that just within India or international?
Yeah, I think we got responses only from India.
Okay, that's fine. That's all I wanted to know. Thanks.
And this is from school, mostly from school leaders.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you.
Welcome.
yeah, to our virtual audiences, we can see you, hear you, and any comments, questions, we're watching the chat. So please feel free to send us your comments. Thanks, Amrita and Sameer, for setting the context. And like Sameer mentioned in the introduction, a part of this idea of why we need to have this conversation on a larger platform like this about nurturing and measuring the impact of counseling, it came about from a conversation that I had at another forum where I know Anjali was there, Sameer was there, a few others were there, and the conversation was about structuring the process of counseling in schools. And it met with some very interesting responses from the room. The counselors were very excited. So, it's very counterintuitive. You'd think that counselors would be resistant to being measured or, to showcase impact. But it was the other way around. Counselors were extremely excited and looking forward to a structure. And it was some school leaders who were not quite sure because they thought it would compromise a school's ability to customize the experience of career counseling in schools, because they thought that too much structure will compromise quality of customization, which isn't, there's no right or wrong here. It's very subjective to the size of your school, how many students there are. But keep in mind, there is something, just like you have student-teacher ratio, there's something called a student-counselor ratio, which is terrible in our schools. And I think all of us are very aware of it, which is all the more reason why you need to structure a curriculum and subsequently measure the outcomes of what is being done in your school. So this is the context. And I'm just going to quickly show you some of the clicker. Oh, yeah, thanks. There are certain hygiene factors because, this is complex and it's not an overnight thing. It takes some time, but there is some kind of a path that has been charted. We've tried to do it. We've taken a stab at it. We've identified what you need to do before you set about your metrics and your structure. The first thing is you need to have defined goals for the Office of Career Guidance. How many of us in this room have defined goals for our offices? Raise your hands and be very honest. It's okay if you don't, because most people don't. I'm really happy to see at least like 10% of the room raising their hands. Maybe in the Q&A section, we'd also like to hear from you how you went about defining your goals, because that itself is a challenge, right? But this is a complex practice. When you create a brand, you do a brand board, right? Like you do a brand exercise. Similarly, when you're setting up a guidance office, you need to have a visioning exercise which involves the right stakeholders, whether it is your school leaders, you need to involve teachers, you need to involve certain, parent bodies, students, and then finally, of course, your counselor, and define goals for every grade. You have macro goals and then you have micro goals in the form of milestones that you want to achieve in every single grade, right? Define budgets and map resources. I cannot stress the importance of this enough. You cannot measure outcomes without knowing what you're investing tangibly. Because at the end of the day, we are all responsible for a P&L, right? There's no running away from that. So we need to know how much we want to allocate and empower our office with. And it's not just money, it's absolutely resources as well. You can have all the budgets in the world, but if you have one person doing the job of 5 or 10, it's simply not fair. And I'm just being really honest. It's just simply not fair. You need to scale that depending on the size of your cohorts. Data management processes and tools. Again, in order to derive metrics and analytics, you need technology. You cannot maintain most of this data on Google Sheets. Beyond a point, it's harrowing. You will face a lot of challenges on Excel, on Google Sheets. There are a lot of processes and tools available, right? And again, that can be a separate session, but I'm happy to sort of share some of these project management tools and measurement tools separately. Please reach out to me. But there are some, nothing is mapped to guidance specifically, and I'm not talking about, I'm not going to name any companies, but I'm not talking about edtech companies that are in the space right now. They do limited forms of measurements. Some do more than the others, but there are other project management tools as well which are available, which are not specific to counseling, which you can use. Integration of guidance goals in schools' mission and growth plan. If your guidance office is not at the core, just like your academic goals are, you forget the future that we are all imagining right now. It's not going to happen. It needs to be integrated in your school's vision, and it needs to be reminded, and it needs to be a part of your DNA. It can't be just an extracurricular activity, that is being done. And last but not the least, no, actually there are 2 points. I've already talked about the grade-wise student journeys. And then last but not the least, decide the review metrics. I'm going to move on to that quickly because that itself is a large part. So like Sameer, Amrita and I really spent a lot of time in trying to put together what are the core metrics that matter. Some are more common than the others. And we clubbed them into 3 clear categories, all right? So the first one is access and inclusion. The second is the way you deliver the curriculum that has been planned. If you have a curriculum, don't get daunted by the word curriculum, okay? It does not have to be so complex. Curriculum is simply what do you plan to do with your students in the next 3 or 6 months. That's your curriculum, right? And last but not the least, outcomes. In terms of the final, who's going where and what did they do, etc., etc. So I'm now gonna, I think we've divided this between us. So I'm doing the first. Okay, all right, I'm back. Here I am. Hello, it's been a long time. All right, so under access and inclusion, I spoke about the guidance, counselor and student ratio. This is a metric.
I just want to make a disclaimer here.
Yeah.
Schools say we have 8:1 teacher-student ratio. When did we talk about, have we ever talked about guidance, counselor to student ratio? How many talked about ratio in our prospectus in the websites? Teacher-student ratio. We all talked about it, right? So I think this is an important point to look at.
I think that's a very interesting thing because one is talking about it, but second is adding it as part of your school's USP. When you talk about your school's USPs in your brochures and collaterals that you all painstakingly put together. So if we move beyond just college placements and actually talk about the attention that your students will get through the counselors, I think, okay. So the guidance counselor student ratio is a critical metric which will tell you as a school whether you're being able to do justice to the students in that cohort and to your counselor equally. How many sessions have been had between the student and between a student and a counselor? So there is a unique number of counselor sessions per student, but there's also a cohort average, which is a separate metric. What is the average number of sessions that cohort, grade 11, grade 12, grade 9, grade 10, have had with the counselor? What this does is, so from a metric perspective, it's fine, but what does it tell you? What is the story that this is telling you? The average number of counselor sessions per student per grade can then be more detailed into finding trends on what kind of students are seeking more sessions, right? and what kind of students are actually invariably getting more sessions. And it might not just be the ones who really need the attention. So mapping it back to learning outcomes, okay, and also gaining an insight that the ones who are not really attending counselor sessions, are they seeking external help? Tuition class for counseling, is that what's going on? Because that is absolutely what is going on, right? So here you are investing so much time and effort in setting up a guidance cell. Please try to control. You can't stop it, but it tells you a lot about what you need to do to be able to nip it in the bud. Number of counselor sessions with students with special needs. Okay, forget the number of sessions, right? This is a metric. How many of us have a separate understanding of students with special needs? When it comes to counseling, I would love to hear from you, because we really struggled with it when we were putting this together. We are not really aware of too many schools that have a separate setup. I'd love to hear from you as well. Can we have a mic there?
Yes. Hi, Poonam.
Yeah, we'll hear from her first, and then Poonam, we'll just come to you. Yeah, go ahead, just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Anchita. I'm from Shivnada School, Faridabad. So we have a separate cell, and that kind of takes care of the entire learning metrics, the performance, and maps out the goals for the counseling as well. So we do it in collaboration with the career guidance and also the academics. So whenever we sit down for a counseling session, it's not just one vertical with who's talking about that this is what the student should do, what are the kind of strengths that we have. We're talking about multiple areas. We're talking about learning metrics, we're talking about outcomes, we're talking about just goals, and not putting you to a conventional undergraduate degree, but also kind of mapping you that if at all there is a vocational career that we kind of look at, then what is the best possible option that we can map it to? And a lot of backward integration that goes in, if that helps.
That's really nice to hear.
Yeah. So I'm Poonam from Sri Ram School. We, of course, have a very strong sense set up in the academic front. And when it comes to the career counseling, the career counseling department works very closely with the academic team. And we actually do a complete session on career placements, career suggestions, whether it's transitioning, send students into colleges or into vocational into vocational jobs straight out of school. So we are very strong on that. We work collaboratively with the academic team and with the parent body as well.
Ma'am, that's very insightful. Thank you, Anchita, and thank you, Poonam, ma'am. I think for the schools here that are still starting off, they're really keen. The schools that don't have that setup doesn't mean they don't want to do it. We understand that. But it's about where do you start, right? So is there a tip that you can give them in terms of okay, one is collaboration with, of course, academics, but what's that one starting point?
I think this is something which is very one-on-one. It has to be tailored to every kid. And up till grade 8 classes, academic classes can be inclusive. Doesn't sound correct, but very often when the academic ability, the child's academic ability cannot help him cope with the mainstream curriculum, they will need to be pulled out into a more flexible curriculum, and sometimes no academic curriculum into a completely vocational program. I think since we have a lot of leaders here, our schools are places where we can also provide a lot of employment. Yeah. So, our students really fit into students with disability can really be employed in our schools, and we should really lead and be the change makers in the field.
Thank you. This is the last comment, and then we'll move on. But we will be open to stay back and have a little conversation.
Yeah, in our school we have special teachers who are there for the special needed students, and their academic performance is in a different way. It is being analyzed for a child, and we see that the same child, we guide the parents as well, and we call the psychiatrists, everyone, sit together and counsel the parent as well as the child to nurture him and then see in which area he is going to get progressed, and we see that he'll be placed in the right place.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
I think we'll move forward. I know, Anshita, you have something to say. We'll come back to you. In the interest of time, can we move back to the slides, please? Just another addition from a university perspective is not many universities in India. I know Ashoka has an excellent setup for special education needs. You can reach out to universities that have really strong setups themselves and seek that guidance from them, because they are sort of doing what you're trying to do, right? So, it's a great starting point for you to seek guidance from these universities, and I'm sure that they would be more than willing to help. Yeah,
Wanted to
please,
make.
please.
The understanding of needs is very linear right now for all of us, right? Just go back and think the emerging needs. The emerging needs. It's just not special education needs. There are additional needs in addition to that. So keep your idea of needs as a broad spectrum and not as a linear need that only child with functional disabilities or cognitive innate, sort of advancement. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think this deserves a separate session again. I think Amde, we just need to make a list of all the separate sessions we need to do, but absolutely needs a separate session. I also think that the fact that we are talking about so much customization, the fact that our students are not what they used to be even 5 years ago, right? We see the changes in our classroom. There is a huge difference in the evolution of the student in your classroom. And it is difficult because how much do you customize? To what level? And the more customization that you need, the more structures you need. You need structures to make your customizations scalable, unless you have a very, very small school, which is also fantastic. All right, I'm going to end there with the last point of the number of students seeking external paid college counseling. Not everybody is going to be honest about it. There is a way to seek this information because this is sought from the student. We've set down a way in which, through a survey, etc. But this is a metric that you need to keep your eyes on, for sure. And I'm going to pass this on to Amrita.
I had a question about the counselor-student ratio. So for example, an average school in a B-tier city, 1,000+ student, what is a very, very reasonable ratio in current scenario? Should we be aiming for? Just the aim of that. The high school students are around 400, 500. I'm just giving you.
Yeah, so I can only quote the results from the Student Quest survey that we did, which was that majority of the counselors said that they have a ratio of above 1:100. So, yeah, which is covering students of grade 9 to 12. And so this was a question in the counselor survey. And the second question was, what is the desired ratio? And most counselors reported saying 1:50. That was the majority response. So that could be an indication, but of course then that impacts budgets, that impacts everything else, right? So that's why not having a budget is kind of surprising and not thinking about it is kind of surprising, right? Yes.
Just one second.
I'll just. No worries.
Thank you. On the same point of counselor-student ratio, I think individual boards also require a different ratio because the level of effort is different for each board.
So just a small point here. I used to do a survey in grade 11th in the beginning in my ex-role as a counselor. It would give me how much workload analysis I have for myself as a counselor. Because if 30% of my population is going through NEET and JEE, necessarily they just don't need as many sessions. Because if 70% of or 80% of my students are looking at 4 different countries, making 4 different country applications, my load is going to be very different. So I think it also do your need analysis every year. Okay? Workload analysis per counselor. So you may have a counselor sitting with 1,000 kids, but if 980 kids are going into the conventional careers with a conventional route, you might not need as many counselors. So workload analysis is important. Thank you.
And that can be realigned actually every year. So if you have that information at the beginning of the year, you can provide your counselor more support and then give maybe lesser substitute, whatever, So I think that's also something to look into. I've actually made notes because I thought I would forget. So curriculum delivery methods is something that, I've been keenly interested in as I started as a counselor. I think the first point was grade-wise achievement of curriculum goals. Are we really saying, okay, we are saying counseling should start early, in grade 8, in grade 7, in grade 9. What are my objectives and intended outcomes for each year? We all study English, math, we all study first sounds, then we make 3-letter words, and we make 5-letter words. And that sets the first, knowing the sound sets the foundation for that. So what is it that, how are we setting objectives and intended outcomes for career and college counseling grade-wise? Is my outcome of the previous grade leading to my objective of the next grade? That's something that will help us achieve the goals. And, this again will vary depending on the cohort, depending on, what their interest is. So that was something that, we wanted to highlight. Then, what are the number of students with individualized career plans? Just like in academics, you will see some students will need more support, right? So how are we tapping into that? How do we know that who will need more support? Are we able to provide for that more support? So what are our ways of seeking that information, and what are our ways of meeting that need? So can we ask a student to stay back? Are we available for time after students' classes? And are we doing, and what are we addressing in a one-to-many format? And what are we addressing in a one-to-one format? What are we addressing in a one-to-small group format? That's again a good way to optimize your student to counselor ratio and match to the needs. Then participation in experiential programs. And before I go into that actually one thing is the number of sessions, which you saw earlier. One is that you're offering a lot. The other is what is the level of participation over the years with students. Then that goes deeper into what is the level of engagement. Is it that you have universities coming and talking, you're doing sessions, or are you also making students active, participants in this whole sort of exchange of information, or is it one way? So are they only absorbing, or is it passive for them, or is it more active for you? And therefore, you're increasing your workload, whereas you can also seek their support in, student support or parent support in bringing more ownership, in bringing through information seeking, right? It's hard for kids to say, okay, you have to take a decision, this is on you. But if you say that, can you help me in understanding this article? And then you see, these are also subtle ways of maybe increasing their skills and also increasing their ownership. When we come to experiential programs, we've all seen that counseling, actually, when we talk about profile building, just for the sake of, common understanding, we are saying that students will come up with their own initiatives. You must have seen Model United Nations grow in your own schools, debating clubs, etc. grow. So what is the impact? How much of it is a outcome of the counseling, what the counselor is doing in their office? So are they also, is the scope of that increasing? Let's say you had 2 after-school activities. Now you have 2, 3, or 4. So how is that going? And then, of course, the last bit is really about, the involvement with other departments, the diversity of university interactions. Is everyone coming and talking about their destination only, or about their university only? How are you diversifying what you're being able to get from universities? The other special programs and strategic initiatives, which could be process related. So how are you seeking predicted scores in your school? How are you, streamlining processes, which would come under strategic initiatives? How are you making your exam calendars and things like that to match the external examination timelines as well? And then I think the last point which I'd like to bring in is the involvement with other departments. Yeah. What is that? How is that helping you in your curriculum delivery, or aiding or augmenting your works, particularly if you're the only counselor in school? Yeah, over to you, Sameer.
I just want to add, no, let's go back to the slides, please. Thank you. The diversity of university interactions is also about, so just a university perspective, it's also about, are you skewed towards a particular country or a set of courses that are being represented? Because There are schools that are very keen on engineering, etc. And then, are you encouraging a diversity of exposure? So even if you say, I hear a lot of counselors say, but my students are not interested in humanities. But you need to expose them to humanities, and you really need to think why. How can you tell me that 400 students from your grade 12, 90% of them only want to do engineering? There's something seriously broken there. So in order to sort of rejig that and reimagine that, you need to have a diversity of interactions from universities. Yeah, Samir, over to you.
Thank you. And I think interesting points, what said is build bridges with the academic department. You cannot, as a counselor, sit in your office and say, hey, I know it all. The teacher, and make teachers, every single teacher in your school as a career counselor. When they stay engaged in the process, have, like somebody said in the last session with Jim, that I go and sit with staff members on rotational basis, have lunch with them and continue to tell them what am I doing and what should I do better. So seek information from out. Application versus offer ratio. And I know schools restrict that, and I don't think the purpose of restriction is to increase the yield. To my understanding, it's also to look at the workload analysis of the teacher and the child. Because there are as many essays and, write-ups you can do. Diversity of college course and country in progression. This used to be very interesting. In one of my earlier roles, I realized that the school has made a huge investment in the humanities department, but when it is coming to 11th and 12th, our small section of science department was delivering 90% of the content because the students were choosing science over humanities, right? So these kind of measurement matrices tell you that if you are focusing on STEAM, that's what your population need, then probably you need to realignment your application of resources or allocation of resources. Unconventional progression choices. Again, the same point. Are we doing enough conversations, or are we saying my kids don't want to do it? Like I said, 1,000 kids, 990 want to go to STEAM, but they have not known anything better. The parents were not educated. So I think bring diversity of experience for students to open their mind. If IITs can start liberal arts degree programs today, can there be a better argument than that? Scholarships achieved is another matrix, that what percentage of scholarships one has been able to claim in a particular year. Utilization of council. How much would, oh yes, sorry.
You may have a cohort where there is no need for scholarship, right? There may not be financial aid that is sought. So that does not necessarily mean that you didn't do well or you didn't score well there. So I think at every time, the way you're reporting is also what is important.
So I think it's a very critical point. This changes with your measurement matrix may vary probably from a year to year also. It depends on the cohort. Utilization of counselor learning and development budgets. Of course, I was having conversation with somebody and asked me, why haven't you been to XYZ conference? And I said, I don't need to go because I get everything here. So can I use those large budgets for one large conference, anywhere else to train 10 more teachers to become counselors in the school? So use those conversations, Can we go to the next slide? Who's the clicker? So defining platforms and stakeholders is something I'm going to take. How many of us showcase where our students are going? How many of us showcase? Okay. Where do we showcase? Social media? Annual Achievers Award ceremony? Maybe let's hear. If website? Sometimes the websites don't get updated for years. Newsletters? Alumni? That's very good. Anyone else? Counseling cell office, boards, display boards. Think, where else do you need to sort of showcase this? Do universities get to see where your kids are going year on year? Can you track the right universities and the right, that knowledge into this thing? Does the community where your school exists know this? Does the city know this? Does the country know this? Does the board you're affiliated to know this? So I think of the platforms you want to showcase your kids to. And again, I think, Anjali, going back to your point, measurement of matrix which was referred or sort of recommended was top universities. I don't have a problem with that. Where is it represented is what I have a problem with, right? So keep that point in mind. If your presentation starts and begins with that and 80% conversation is happening there, there's definitely wrong something there. But if that's a part of your measurement matrix, there's nothing wrong with that. Yes. Oh, switch on.
Hello? Yeah. For the defining platforms and stakeholders, there is, if you see in the parenthesis, there's internal and external, right? External is what we all focus on. I think it's also important to understand how you're going to communicate this internally and what are you going to communicate, which is something that Samir will come to. But internal stakeholders are as critical as external. In fact, sometimes even more critical than external stakeholders. And defining platforms. So from a very marketing perspective, if there are, I'm sure all of you are involved in admissions for your schools, etc. Think from the perspective of distribution. What you want to showcase and where do you want to showcase it. Online and offline are the simplest forms of bifurcation, but within that there are a lot of platforms, within online and within offline. All right, so we can't do that work for you here because it depends on your school's priorities, but yeah.
Also, sometimes the schools give very conflicting messages. We talk about holistic education, but when the reports are published, only the top are on the top, right? So can we rethink that placement board we do in the school? Can it be more horizontal than being in a vertical in its approach, right? So internal stakeholders, we tell our children that what we value is who they are, but what we print is it is in alignment with what we believe in or what we at least tell and claim to believe in, right? So when you start placing your admissions in liberal arts universities on the top, you understand you value that form of education. But if you're placing your IITs or NEETs and JEEs, top scorers on the top, you're saying something else, but you're doing something else. So the community wants to adhere to be in that top bracket, right? It's just a realignment. You're still publishing everything. You're not taking away anything from an ITN or NEET or a top university in an Ivy League placement. You're not taking anything away from them. But by placing them, what is the message you're giving to the internal community? Then the entire community, how many of us struggle with parents to tell that this is not an Ivy League or a top application? I just had this conversation with my nephew, who's in a top school in the country. We had a lot of hue and cry at home. I said, you're not making 5 applications to top colleges. Sorry, choose one. But we are inducing that conversations by this way, by outcome showcase on different platforms and stakeholders. Can we realign that? Yes, Anjali.
Put that merit roll, 96.5%, 99%. I mean, where is it success for all? That means on 2 levels, you're telling all students that marks is the only thing that matter. And here universities are crying hoarse about holistic admission, co-curricular being as important, soft skills being important, but we go back to academics. But then that's another conversation.
That's another conversation. Please.
I don't want to take any time. If you see, the pressure comes from the top, right? Business schools talk highest salaries. You talk universities saying average salaries. The metrics itself is starting with numbers from there, so which is tapering down to schools. I think it's not about the schools, the entire system is very linear. So that's really where I think you have to make the difference, because they want them to go to an IIT because IIT has that many salary, and then they make it to the US and they have that scholarship. So I think it's the whole system that needs to change its communication, which hopefully eventually will come to schools as well.
Thank you. Kala told me about developing another tool which we have to partner with her about. So maybe next year we'll have a session with Kala. Yeah. So can we just close this loop and then go on? Because I know we're running short of time. Over to you.
Okay, so in the annual guidance report, I think what is it that we are reporting as counselors? Are we only outcome-based could be just the placements? Are we also reporting about the diversity of the universities that have come to us? Are we talking about process enhancements that we've made? How we are changing communication timelines? What are we communicating when? So how are we enhancing processes of, let's say, the applications or, the external testing and your calendar? How are we making those process enhancements? How are we making communication frequency? Are we able to increase communication frequency with students or with parents? That could also be a part of your report, which is outside of just the outcomes of the placements with respect to the country, the course, and the college as well. How are we seeing the the touch points is one thing. How many times are we meeting? We covered that as a matrix. The other is, okay, there is a touch point. Is there a checkpoint? Are we, sort of saying, okay, I've introduced this, or I've spoken about, let's say, the concept of essay writing. What is my checkpoint for that, right? So we are introducing a lot of things, but we're not closing many. So are we able to include that in our reports as well? And the last thing is that, are we really reporting our obstacles in the report? Are we reporting about the trainings that we are undergoing, what's useful, what helped, what didn't help, and therefore where are we with respect to our obstacles and with respect to our failures? So that could also be a part of the annual guidance report outside of just the outcomes of placements and of aid received, which were the top two in the, in the survey.
Just in the interest of the seamlessness, let's just, I'm just wanting to
Yeah.
go to this. Yeah, so just in the same vein, we'll just cover it here. The report, the structure of the report. We've put a broad structure together, okay, to cover what Amrita just said. You need to bring your philosophy and goals together as an overview. That's absolutely sacrosanct. The student and parent survey outcomes, okay, we encourage you to conduct an annual survey at the beginning and at the end of the year from a guidance perspective and no other perspective. Overview of key outcomes, which is the 3 categories that we spoke about, and choosing the metrics that you want to. You don't have to cover everything. You decide what are the metrics you want to pick. Challenges, like Amrita said, recommendations on what you wish to see or what you think should be done. And also, identifying who's working on this report. We missed writing that here. But who's working on this report? Is it just the counselor? Because then that's really not fair. So who is working on this report is something that you need to define. And then frequency, we suggest monthly, and then you have quarterly and biannual or annual reviews. These are just some suggested frequencies.
It's actually interesting, Sameer, I'm going to pass it on to you, but just in the session before, universities actually said that, we can often make out whether this child comes from a school where they have access to a counselor versus not. So I think even including in the surveys that we spoke about, in the structure that we spoke about, don't only include the student and the parent survey, but also try to, have some surveys for universities with which you interact, where your students go, maybe a peer survey with other counselors, maybe a survey with other departments, so that your expectations with the counseling department are getting more aligned towards the vision.
Survey with your academic team, please.
Yes.
What
Yeah,
are
that's
their
what I meant, other
expectations?
departments.
Yeah, so that's very, very important. I think most of it is self-explanatory. I wanted to focus on showcase achievement of students overcoming adversity, So I think just ask, can I print your story? Because your story will change 100 other lives in times to come. Can I showcase that and not on the bulletin board? Can that be read more often than not? Acknowledgement and recognition of the Office of Guidance. I think having a space and all that is excellent because that's a recognition. But in other aspects, what are the other ways we're recognizing this department? And I think having 1,000 plus is already a recognition with the noise made. So congratulations to your school. You're sitting in this session. That in itself is a recognition. So should we move on or skip the rest, I think? I think we'll leave you with 2 important questions. I think that's my favorite statement. We continue to ask. My colleague Manjima is here and other people are here. So I think, do you measure what you value? And do you value what you measure? There's a larger question as a guiding post for you. Please put it in your office. What you're measuring, you don't value because you have to window dress to the world outside because as Kala rightly said, that's the world sees, Sorry. But do you value what you measure? The way you start building rhetoric around you, what you value, and you start measuring that's the game changer. Over to you.
I think where this is coming from is because all 3 of us, and I know all of you in the room, feel and may echo with the sentiment that counseling, good guidance and counseling can really be the equalizer in many ways. You may have students who are not good at math, you may have students who are not good at history, you may have students who are not regular to school, etc. But I think good quality counseling is what can change. So it's one function that can bring many functions together. and outcomes together, it can increase academic engagement, etc. If they are able to identify their strengths and weaknesses, their areas of interest, and that again goes back to the student-counselor ratio and many more things, often you'll see that why should I have more counselors? But, so counseling can really be the equalizer in many ways and can increase the number of students who succeed. So right now, our focus or our definition of success often tends to be the Ivy Leagues or the academic scoring, etc. But if we increase the counseling that we offer in school and widen that will allow us to widen our definition of success in that sense. So we want to leave you with the thought which is here, but also with the acknowledgement that counseling is what can be an equalizer for many students at different levels.
Just 1 second. Thank you all for being really patient. Amrita and Sameer have summed it up beautifully. Few hygiene announcements. We really wanted to get more detailed into the metrics, but honestly, it's a very complex process. I would propose, I would love to work on, like a project with some of you who is interested. Absolutely, of course. And then, we can put a metric together, but this metric is not a one size fit all. So we can have categorizations of a few kinds of schools and develop metrics around those just as a template. It's not for commercial purposes. It's something that as a community, because at the end of the day, we have so many such conversations, and where does it go? So from an outcome perspective, we'd love to work with whoever wants to, and we can get that in place. Get in touch with any of us. Yeah. We can create a task force, and there are feedback forms in your hands. I'm not like campaigning, but I think it'll be nice to get feedback, honest feedback, because we intend to do so many more such conversations. It's very helpful for us when you tell us what you thought, good, bad, and ugly. So thank you for your time, and you've been an amazing participative audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bhakti ma'am.
Yes. I'm just going to, display those 2 slides, which we had to skip quickly if you want to take pictures. One is managing expectations. This was the proposed survey for parent-student expectations. Yeah. And 1, 2, 3. Okay. Additional analytics. I will go. It's on the resource thing, right? No? The presentations? Acha. Just take pictures here. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone
One or two.
for joining us.